So today I just felt out of the blue the motivation to talk about some characters I felt were underappreciated and deserved more credit. They can be underappreciated by audiences in general, or they can be underappreciated in the context of the universe that they live in. One such example I can think of is Nani from Lilo and Stitch, whom I might talk about another day. But today, the fictional character whom I wanted to dedicate some much-deserved appreciation for is Nigel Ratburn from the PBS Kids show Arthur. I would have ideally liked it to be the subject for National Teachers' Day or Week, except that was the beginning of this month, and if Mr. Ratburn were grading me on this video essay, he'd fail me for being weeks overdue. But it's still within the same month as Teacher Appreciation Day/week, so there you go. Now, Arthur has lasted a good 15 years, which is incredible. Even more incredible is how it managed to maintain its quality and transcend the generations over time. Okay, I know the quality is a bit debatable, especially how most people don't really seem to like the new Flash animation look, but still, it's been teaching and connecting with me since I was young and with children whom I would now be old enough to be a parent to. The variety of lessons and serious issues the show has successfully tackled is almost immeasurable, even with a lesson or two botched up here and there, and the characters are well written and very identifiable, even a select few members of the cast who are popularly hated by both kids and adults in the audience, be they Muffy, Binky, or especially DW. Then there's Nigel Ratburn, who, in both the show and the books, is predominantly remembered for being that daunting teacher who keeps students on their toes with assignments and random pop quizzes, and makes them constantly feel like they're walking on eggshells. The most positive recognition he seems to have gotten among viewers, or at least as of late, is for being one of the best examples of an LGBT character in a show aimed at young audiences done right, or just teaching about kids' concept of gay marriage in general. In the episode Mr. Ratburn and the Special Someone, which is indisputably a positive thing, but apart from that, well, he's not regarded as a terrible fictional teacher. He isn't cruelly and constantly belittling his students at every given opportunity except those he plays favorites with, like Severus Snape, nor is he a kind of drill sergeant who mentally assaults students to push themselves to even personal physical injury, like J.K. Simmons as Terrence Fletcher in Whiplash. But he's not regarded as a teacher who is super amiable with his students like Miss Honey from Matilda, or educational in a super fun and exciting way like Miss Frizzle. Mr. Ratburn falls on the spectrum of teachers who are not the most well-liked, but that doesn't mean he isn't a good teacher or a well-written character. Most of us, if not all of us, have had at least one teacher in our lives who, even if they weren't cruel or displaying some sort of personal vendetta against us, just seemed unrelentingly tough as nails and next to impossible to please. Maybe even being our teacher for some of our personal weakest subjects, which didn't exactly make things easier for us, as has been the case with me on more than one occasion. The first that we see of Ratburn in the books by Mark Brown is Arthur's Teacher Trouble, where he's introduced as having the class file quietly and orderly out of the classroom at the end of the first day back to school, and in alphabetical order, and assigning the students a pile of homework, and not the standard kind of homework you typically expect from a teacher on the first day, like an essay on what you did over the summer, who you are, or what you hope to gain out of his class. No, his homework includes making a clay/bread dough 3D model of the continent of Africa. Not only that, but he announces the very next day a 100-word spelling test that his students have less than a week to study for. Yeah, that's enough to make any student feel like they're going to have an aneurysm. I easily would have, given the struggles I already faced in adapting to the already flawed American education system with its plethora of standardized tests. And he's not that far off in the show either, like how he asks his third grade class not just what the capital of Mongolia is, but also what its latitude and longitude is. And during a contest at school where Arthur has to run home quickly to grab something for the competition and asks Buster to cover for him, while Arthur does make it back in time and completes what he needs and the contest goes without a hitch, Ratburn catches Arthur and Buster speaking about his quick trip home and assigns them both a detention essay, because he's sure as hell to let you know that you can't pull a fast one on him. So yeah, it seems very easy to not like Ratburn as a character, let alone not want to have him as a teacher. So why do I regard him as underappreciated and deserving of better? Well, because Mr. Ratburn, unyielding and overambitious as he can be at times, is still, at the end of the day, a really good teacher. Not only that, but there are a few cartoon rats, apart from examples like Remy from Ratatouille, who manage to stand out against the common stereotype of rats being filthy, raiding, gluttonous, disease-carrying pests. when rats do indeed have a lot of largely uncredited good qualities about them, like their adaptability, their shrewdness, their intelligence, and talent at problem solving, all of which are traits that Mr. Ratburn exhibits. I mean, let's face it, being a teacher is a pretty thankless job in general. Putting up with rowdy students all day and then dedicating many sleepless nights grading their papers, barely making enough to pay their bills, especially when schools are always on the chopping block for budget cuts. And not only do they have to deal with a barrage of unruly kids who have their own individual needs and struggles, and there are so many of them to keep track of at once, but also unruly parents too. I mean, I can tell you all sorts of stories about teachers chastising us about getting calls for giving their children a failing grade or not doing a good job as a teacher, when I distinctly remember most of the kids who were doing such spending most of their time goofing off rather than getting their assignments done. Granted, I was one of those kids who took my assignments very responsibly, and my parents never had to call my teacher about anything, but there you go. So yeah, as much as we, as students, want to complain on those days of school where we're coming home feeling like we're the living dead, imagine being a teacher and by the time you make enough money to retire, you're basically convinced that you are living dead. But Mr. Ratburn is a good teacher because of how invested he is in it and how seriously he takes it, rather than just treating it like an empty obligation. He is stern because he knows the job calls for him to be such, but he is so in a way where he's looking out for his students rather than looking down upon them. Now, he is on the good side of a few of his students, namely Alan, aka the Brain, who of course always takes his assignments and education very seriously. But then there are cases like Binky, who cares more about being tough than being smart, or Buster, who is so often just lost in his own fantasy of things like science fiction. The real irony of that is how in the last episode, All Grown Up, the kids find the battery-powered game Oscar the Octopus, who predicts what each player will grow up to be, and Buster is predicted to be a teacher, which is among the last professions he could ever see himself taking up, until he eventually does, and his specialty is encouraging kids to write stories. Anyways, in the book version of Arthur's Teacher Trouble and Arthur's Spelling Trouble, when Arthur and the Brain score the highest on their spelling tests and become the class representatives for the spelling bee, after all of Arthur's stressing out and sweating the whole 2 weeks of his studying, he manages to beat the odds and come out on top as the spelling bee champion with his name on the trophy. And at the end, Ratburn not only publicly congratulates Arthur, but also his whole class for their hard work, because at the end of the day, all he expects from them is that they try their best. He knows that his objective as a teacher is not to be liked by or appease his students. His objective is to teach them, and he has their best interests at heart pretty much all the time. And he will see them through to the end, whether they appreciate it or not, for their benefit more than his own. It's also worth noting at the end of the book that he has plans to teach kindergarten the following year, much to the chagrin of DW. But hey, if there's anyone who can put DW in her place when her parents failed to do so, it would be him. The TV episode version of Arthur's Teacher Trouble, in which Arthur and the gang are starting their school year and learn that Ratburn is their teacher, they pick up on the rumors from Prunella and the other students who had him the previous year, describing him as a hypnotic vampire who eats nails for breakfast and puts failing students on death row, just like in the book. But unlike in the book, that level of fear-mongering gets taken to the extreme level, where they fear that he is some sort of child murderer, especially when they see him carrying what seem to be dismembered limbs from one classroom to another. But eventually they find out that it was a puppet for an after-school puppet show, where he showcases his talent for entertaining kids. And this shatters one of their initial preconceptions of him altogether. Arthur admires how Ratburn is able to balance being a teacher, soccer coach, and entertainer all at once, when he himself barely knows how to balance his own 8-year-old life. And Ratburn tells him that, hey, that's one of the things that comes from learning discipline. The more you know how to keep on top of your responsibilities, the more you can manage, and the farther you can go to succeed. So he's leading by example. Amongst the Mark Brown books where the character's inclusion plays a major part, there is also Arthur's Teacher Moves In, where Arthur's world is turned upside down when his parents volunteer to house Ratburn, whose roof has imploded during a blizzard. Arthur is initially in such a panicked mode at this idea that he even feels the need to ask to borrow some of the Brain's books and posters to keep Mr. Ratburn impressed and put on the facade that he's got his studying game on 24/7. In fact, one of the first shocks Arthur gets upon Ratburn's arrival is when Ratburn demonstrates one of the last things Arthur would ever have expected, a magic trick to make all his homework disappear, something that Arthur is actually eager to learn for once. And as the story goes on, Arthur comes to realize that Ratburn isn't always who he presents himself as a teacher. He dresses casually in a t-shirt, he likes watching the cartoon show Spooky Poo, and he has quite the sweet tooth. and that contributed to why he ended up marrying the local chocolatier. And this is something that most of us would never have expected when we're at Arthur's age, or at least it's natural for us to expect that if our relationship with one person is teacher and student, then the teacher views us as the student all the time, because we abide by the philosophy that school is school and home is home, but we're still more or less the same person wherever we go. However, as we get older and we start bearing the stress of responsibilities and expectations that we regularly must live up to, our natural coping instinct is to compartmentalize our lives. The more we adapt to the philosophy that there is a time and place for everything, the more natural it is for us to decide that there are just some things that we reserve for sharing with select people in our lives at certain times. And Ratburn, when living under the same roof as Arthur, shares with him some parts of his personality that are utterly surprising to Arthur. Of course, the more Arthur starts warming up to Mr. Ratburn while he's living with him, the more the rest of the class resents him, calling him a teacher's pet, accusing his acing of a math test being a matter of Ratburn playing favorites with his students, or because Arthur's dad makes him cake. Like, God forbid it can't be because spending time with Ratburn has actually helped him to accumulate new strategies in studying. But when Ratburn gets word from Arthur about the bullying he's been subjected to, instead of chastising the other students publicly, his solution is to say, with my house needing reconstructing, I'm going to need to stay closer to it, so I will be staying at Francine's, then Binky's, then maybe Muffy's, and so on and so forth. But as tough as he is as a teacher, even when he is reprimanding his students, he's not always coming down on them with the force and grace of God like they fear that he would be. For example, in the episode So Funny I Forgot to Laugh, easily one of, if not the worst episode in the whole show, not just in the later seasons, when Arthur is portrayed as a disgustingly uncharacteristic bully toward Sue Ellen, whom he declares can't take his constant teasing of her and her sweater from a pen pal friend as a joke, when Ratburn calls Arthur after class and scolds him, saying, "How would you like it if someone did that to you?" which Arthur has happened to him plenty of times throughout the books and show, which very much adds insult to injury, and tells him to write an apology letter to Sue Ellen, he does so without displaying any legitimate anger. No frowning, no yelling, just being calm and collective, but still firm. He knows that sometimes getting angry won't do anything but get the perpetrator to shut down, and he knows that there are ways to reach someone and be assertive without being aggressive. That's probably the most morally sound call made by any character in the whole episode. I say most because this is one instance where Arthur's actions probably would warrant him being yelled at, and at the very least earn him a detention, a letter to his parents, or even a suspension, considering that he took his levels of teasing to posting mock photos of Sue Ellen on the school lockers, as well as online, which is essentially cyberbullying, to the point that she wants to transfer to another class. Yeah, like I said, one of, if not the worst episode in the whole show. There is a subtle hint that Mr. Ratburn, when he was younger, must have lived under a lot of pressure in an environment of high expectations, when, with one line of dialogue where he lists off a list of prizes, is as, well, the usual knickknacks and gewgaws, smelly erasers, colored pencils, keychains, yo-yos, cloyingly vulnerable beanbag kittens, another bit of precious childhood magic transformed into a crude Pavlovian system of behavioral reinforcements. Apart from that line being aimed at the parents watching while it goes right over their kids' heads, that line may be a subtle hint of melancholy in Ratburn's voice, suggesting that he may be thinking to his students, don't take for granted your childhood where you have it, because it doesn't last, especially if he himself came from a background of consistently high expectations that forced him to grow up too quickly. And there is some credence for this in Mr. Ratburn and the Special Someone, where the female adult rat whom Arthur, Buster, Francine, and Muffy initially assume is Mr. Ratburn's bride-to-be, is introduced telling Nigel that he's being too soft and settling for far less than he ought to with his caterers, settling for an A-minus wedding, if you will, and then making an order for tea that is steeped precisely to 3.5 minutes and sending it back to the waiter saying, it's only 2 3/4, almost like she's Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, or Leonard's mother Beverly Hofstadter from the same show. And the four of them are in a panic that if their teacher marries a woman who tells him that he needs to toughen up, that horrifies them into thinking that they have to break up this engagement, even taking it upon themselves to prepare a unanimous objection speech where they are all invited to his wedding. And it turns out that the lady they thought was his bride is really his sister Patricia. Or one of his sisters, anyways. And while she is even tougher than Ratburn and really sets an example for him to never set the bar low wherever he goes, his other sister, Rodentia Ratburn, who appears in the early episode Arthur's Substitute Teacher Trouble, when she comes in to substitute while Nigel has to call in sick. The students speculate how much of a ruthless, educated cynic Nigel must have been even when he was much younger, and how it's only logical that his sister be likewise. Only for Rodentia to come in and present herself as very smiling and upbeat, eager to get along and be well liked by the students, to the point where she's very easygoing on them, a bit too easygoing in fact, which at first they don't mind as it's a refresher from Nigel's barrage of high expectations, but the more time they spend with her and her preschool kindergarten level questions and entertainment, the more fed up they get and the more they start feeling infantilized, which even forces them to admit that they missed their old teacher and his challenges. But this leads me to speculate one of two possibilities. Either Rodentia detests the constant level of high expectations her brother Nigel lives by and wants to distance herself from as much as possible, or Nigel consulted with her about how he is aware about his students' frequent resentment of him and his teaching methods, and this was an act that they both conjured up with the intention to get the students to admit that they appreciate him for a change. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But hey, I was in the target audience for this show in its early days, and that includes this episode when it aired. And the fact that me and others are talking about it even as adults really only goes to show how much it meant to us and stuck with us over the years. But really, that's what makes Mr. Ratburn a much better teacher than he is often credited for. And even if some of what he teaches his students may seem boringly traditional for a classroom itinerary, or even something utterly outlandish that seems like it'll be of no use to them later down the line, he is aiming to teach them as much as possible in the hopes that at least some of it sticks and comes in handy in their lives sometime down the line. I applaud him for that, and for any of you teachers who stick it out through your worst days with your worst students for those very same reasons, I applaud you for that as well, and happy Teacher Appreciation Month. Thank you very much for consuming this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will look forward to reading what you have to share in the comments. I will be going off on a week-long vacation early June, and I look forward to seeing you all again when I come back. So until next time, take care.